Hello, DCU fans! Today's going to be my breakdown and review of the Peacemaker finale. We'll be looking at timeline, and there were some pretty cool timeline indicators, actually, Easter eggs, and of course, where we go from here. So, there will be spoilers, but as long as you're okay with that, then let's dive right in and see what we can find out. Don't forget, we have an October contest running all month long. Be a subscriber, leave a comment. You could win a book or a steelbook. Best of luck. And we have a membership option with lots of cool perks, so you might check it out. Plus, hang around to the end of the video, and I'll talk about the Doomsday Countdown rewatch on the Discord. All right, so here's the timeline we've been working with. No changes to the timeline with this episode, but definitely some clarifications that this is indeed the correct timeline. So we'll talk more about it as we go along. All right, so we open actually with a very cool flashback. Finally, we learn about the boat incident. It happened 1 month ago. Everything starts at a Big Belly Burger. I mean, where else? And of course, we've seen Big Belly Burger in the Superman movie and lots of other places throughout the DCU. All right, so we see that Chris and Harcourt are spending some time together, and I love that she draws this artwork, with water and a straw, and he's like, okay, what is it? And she's like, it's you. And he's like, no, it's a box with 2 dots. And she's like, yeah, but your face is a box with 2 dots. That is really funny. And I got to give credit to John Cena for being willing to let them make that joke. So very, very good. Very funny. All right. Then we see they get a lot of drinks. Let me tell you what, that is a whole bunch of alcohol. So now we know why they were really loose and free with their actions throughout this. So on the way out, Chris actually saves Freckles here from getting a serious beatdown. Harcourt was just about to take him down, but luckily, all is well. So they decide to go for a little walk, and she asks a funny question. She says, I wouldn't have asked this if I didn't have a little bit of a buzz, right? But is Vigilante in love with you? I think we all kind of wonder that, right? And he's like, no. His older brother just wasn't good to him, And so, he wants to hang out with the cool kids. Basically considers Peacemaker to be like his older brother. So that's cool. And then we see that it's always a good time to catch a concert, especially if it's on a boat. So yeah, they get up there and start having a great time, right? And then their eyes meet and their hands lock. And I must say, this is now the opposite of what happens in the opening credits, right? Because in the opening credits, they're pulled apart, but now instead, they come together and they have that big kiss. Oh man. Again, the alcohol probably loosened Harcourt up a bit, but not so much that she didn't soon realize this was a mistake. She says, I gotta go, and she leaves him standing there wondering, did this mean anything, right? I mean, literally, for the whole next month, he's obsessed with trying to figure out, was there something more to this? Okay, so here's what I think is really cool. Later in the episode, we learn that this event happened on May 22nd. So they don't give the year, but we know it's 2025. But this is what's wild. May 22nd is also one of the dates in the Superman movie. So literally, while Superman's being held captive in that pocket universe, Chris and Harcourt are having that date. And then this is really cool. It was 2 days before that when Peacemaker had the TV interview and slammed Superman, right? Because we know from the movie that this happened on May 20th. So, okay, chronologically then, he does this interview, and then 2 days later, he and Harcourt have that date on the boat. So, I think that's really, really cool. They've tied this together so nicely. All right, so now we see that Chris is in jail, right? Because at the end of the last episode, remember, he was arrested by Argus. He says, I don't want to see anybody because, I'm basically the angel of death. Well, maybe he should get out because poor Eagly is so depressed. This was just so sad to see him just sitting in the corner, wouldn't even look at anybody. Poor Eagly. Poor Eagly. All right, but Adebayo is working on how to get him a good lawyer, and soon, because he's got a court date coming in 3 months. All right, so now you might get a better idea why I was so surprised when in episode 6 we learned that Lex Luthor, just a month after the Superman movie, has literally been sentenced already. He knows he's in for 265 years. So I had some people leave a comment and say maybe he just took an immediate plea bargain, said, look, I'm guilty, we all know I am, just send me to jail. Because on the other hand, we have Peacemaker, who isn't even going to have a court date for 3 months. So yeah, very interesting. So I have no idea how Lex Luthor got through the justice process so fast, but yeah, he was very, very guilty. That's obvious. So Adebayo says, Adrian, we need the money down here so that we can hire a capable lawyer. But of course, Adrian doesn't want to use it because he considers it blood money. So then she comes up with a really creative idea. She says, well, I guess I'm just better friends with Chris because I don't mind risking a blood curse. And he's like, oh, I would totally take on a blood curse for him. So, man, she has Adrian wrapped around her fingers. She knows exactly what makes him tick, and that is hilarious. So, sure enough, it works. And now they post bail for Chris to get him out of jail. And then this is so funny. The dude can't pronounce her name. And I'll be honest, I had a lot of trouble pronouncing it as well. In fact, I'm sure I butchered it at some point during this video, right? But that's really clever joke. All right, so now he says, I just want to get Eagly and I want to go. I'm leaving town. So we'll pick up with him in a minute, but now we need to talk about what is going on with the QUC. So we have Harcourt and Economos talking about the fact that he's looking for someplace safe to breathe with food and a water supply, someplace uninhabited, but they don't know why. What is his purpose? Well, that's something we'll find out in a minute, but notice that Sydney is saying this tech is so far beyond anything we know terrestrially. So he's so excited to be working with it. And in fact, Flag has brought in all of Luther's crew, because we see that he's brought in Otis, and he's brought in McCoy, who was in the Superman movie, and also Jessup, who was in the Superman movie. And it was funny because in the podcast, James Gunn said this was really easy to do all these cameos because they were all on set after doing the Superman movie, so he brought them in to film these scenes. Very, very smart. All right, so now we see them exploring the different portals. Some of them are locked, like door 28, that they can't even get into, and everybody's still trying to figure out, what does Flag want us to find in here? And then I love that Judo Master, who's in a full containment suit, still has on his costume underneath. Dude cracks me up. So they head to their first world. Seems peaceful enough, right? I mean, what could be dangerous here? And then they see one of these little critters, how sweet they are. But oh no, they're not sweet at all, because they gang tackle everybody and they just demolish poor Klein. They destroy his helmet and then they chomp on his nose. Dude gets wrecked. But of course, we do now discover what they were talking about in the first episode when Augie was mentioning the imps, right? He said they were in the Munchkin dimension. I don't know if I would call it the Munchkin dimension. I would call that thing hell on earth. But anyway, they're from the Munchkin dimension and they're 8 doors down. So yeah, now we know exactly what they were talking about. It was those nasty, nasty imps. So we see our friend the alien is still doing his work, and actually, this is the first time he actually responded to somebody else. He kind of hissed at them. Oh man. But still, threw his little rat in the incinerator and went back to his little dimension. In fact, notice on the left, you can kind of see into his dimension, the hallway there. Looks very cold and dreary. I wish they would follow him in there. I want to know more about his dimension. All right, so then we see them heading into a dimension that's facing, well, a similar fate, something we've seen before, right? So they're almost sucked into this black hole, right? But that's the same thing we saw in the Superman movie, where they were almost sucked in. In fact, notice the blue and the yellow edges of the circle look so similar to what we see here, right? And of course, Superman and Krypto were almost sucked in, but managed to get away at the last minute. And I am really getting worried with this relationship between Flag and Lex. I mean, Lex is literally looking at the pictures and saying, looks promising, can't wait to see what's next. Oh man, that is not good. And Economos mentions the same. He says he's running everything past his new BFF, Lex Luthor of all people. Well, anyway, more terrifying dimensions, right? This one with these nasty skull creatures with legs, a zombie one, perfect in time for Halloween, right? And in fact, one of the crew members, one of the Argus members gets turned into a zombie and they have to put him down. Goodness gracious. So this is what just killed me. Flag and his team are just laughing about everything, right? Just yucking it up and having a great time. What jerks. And in fact, Bordeaux is starting to have second thoughts, right? Sasha's laying there in bed with Rick and thinking, not only do I need to cut off my relationship with him, but I don't think I even want to be at Argus anymore. All right, so the good news is they do finally find a safe dimension. And I don't know, tell me your thoughts about the door. Is that relevant, the way it looks? I mean, probably not. But anyway, inside the door, they can take off their helmets. And sure enough, it's a breathable atmosphere. And so Rick Flag is very happy. Great work. We'll take it from here, he says. And then we finally find out what his plans are. He explains, we call the planet Salvation. And this is definitely patterned after the Salvation Run comics. In fact, Gunn himself has said that. And so in these comics, they basically sent all the villains to this other dimension where they thought, oh, this will take care of them. We'll never have to see them again. Of course, things never go as easily as they thought. But in this case, they don't want to just send villains. They want to send anyone who's a metahuman. Good or bad. I mean, Lex wants to send Superman, for example, so yikes. All right, so now he explains something really important, that we can now contract the journey so we can move directly from our doorway to the doorway in the new planet without ever going through the QUC. So I'm wondering if that means this is the last we've ever seen of the QUC, if they've just kind of shut it down and they don't want to go in there anymore, because it's pretty dangerous, obviously. So Flagg explains Arkham and Belle Reve, they're not capable of holding individuals who have extraordinary abilities. Every single month, someone escapes. And in fact, we saw that earlier this season where there was a news story saying there has to be a solution. This is the third metahuman escape from Belle Reve or Arkham in the past 2 months. In fact, the news story is about metahuman breakouts continue. But again, we're not just talking about sending criminals. We're talking about sending anyone that has superpowers. So this is going to be really interesting from a legal standpoint, how they get by all this. So when asked, well, this doesn't sound like a prison, it looks like a planet, he says, I don't want a prison. What I care about is removing dangerous individuals. So this is fascinating to me. We now have Flagg addressing some government officials, but look who's at the table. Otis is sitting there, and Sydney, by the way, is just around the corner. When back in the Superman movie, it was Lex addressing basically all government officials, including Flagg. So man, how things have changed in just a month. In fact, the Secretary of Defense calls that very fact out. You might remember him. We saw him in the Superman movie. But he says, you've come a long way from lambasting Luthor in this room just a month ago to proactively now implementing his plans. So, okay, he said a month ago. Let's check our timeline. Yep, that works really good because maybe more like a month and a half, but less than 2 months. So, May to July. So that fits perfectly. And then, Flagg says what does make sense. It's true. He says, Lex is the smartest man in the world. Why wouldn't we work with him? Well, there's about a million reasons you shouldn't be working with him, but I still see Flagg's point. Okay, so then it looks like Sasha has decided she is done because Flagg says, hey, you coming to dinner? And she's like, nah, I think I'm going to call it an early night. Well, no, she's not going to call it an early night. Instead, she's going to contact Harcourt. So she explains Rick plans on sending metahuman prisoners there. And Harcourt's like, well, what can we do? It wasn't our choice. But she says, I should not be spending my life serving this broken system anymore. So Harcourt still isn't sure she wants to let go of Argus now that she's finally back again. And she says, this is what we do. Try living without it for 2 years like I did. Okay, another timeline thing. Let's go back to our timeline. And yeah, 2 years makes sense, which probably means Harcourt was, fired from Argus soon after Peacemaker Season 1, because we know that she was fired by the time of Creature Commando Season 1 because we didn't see her there. So, okay, it's all working out really good. But then finally Harcourt relents and says, okay, I think you should see a friend of mine. So she hooks her up with Adebayo, who, of course, is wanting to start that security firm. So now Adebayo thinks, hey, we got something going here. I better go and finish things off with my previous relationship. And this is a really touching scene. She says, I'm just here to let you go. And this is so wise. She says, I've learned a relationship isn't just about how you love somebody. It's about building a life together where both partners can be happy. Man, what a great point. So she finally says, I know we ain't for each other. And that's the end. That's the end of their relationship. So really touching scene, very, very well written by Gunn. All right, so now it's time to track down Chris. And I just think this is so wild. They suggest maybe we can track him by that chip in his head. So he still has the chip in his head from the Suicide Squad movie. That's just wild to me. That is just wild. Well, sure enough, they're going to have to go to Argus to use their software to track him, and it's up to Economos to distract everyone. So he tells this dumb joke about a lobster that went into a bar, and it just goes downhill from there. And Harcourt's like, you are the worst in the world at Black Ops. He's like, did I ever say I wasn't? I love Economos so much. Well, anyway, his distraction did work because they're able to track down Chris. So they go to the hotel he's at, but he books it. He does not want to be around anybody. So he starts to take off, and then I love this. Vigilante tackles him and tases him. Look at John Cena's face, man. He really made it look like that hurt. Dude, that's impressive. That's impressive. All right, so they set him down, but he says, hey, after all the death I've caused, I have to be cursed. He killed his brother. He killed his father. He killed Rick Flag Jr. Then he goes to another universe, kills his alternate self, his alternate dad gets killed, and his alternate brother is nearly killed. So he's like, yeah, I'm just cursed. So then another fantastic speech by Adebayo when she says, look, when you are truly who you are, Chris Smith? You touch people, man. You touch people. She's like, I believe in miracles because of you. I saw an eagle hug a human, referring, of course, back to Peacemaker season 1. But then this is so powerful. She says, I know who I am because of you. I know you love me. And I don't know if I can say that about anybody else in this world. Okay, so why do I say this is so touching? Well, if you watch the Peacemaker podcast, James Gunn has a very emotional moment. Yes, he's broken down and he is crying at this point. And he says, I'm crying because that line, that's about my dad. He says, that was the way I felt about him, that he knew his dad loved him and he didn't know if he could say that about anybody else in this world. Of course, now he's married to Jennifer Holland and he points that out, but he wrote that line about his father. I mean, my goodness, tell me that is not powerful. Wow. Good stuff. Really good stuff. All right, so the speech was great, but at first it doesn't seem like it worked because everybody walks away dejected. But nope, Chris just wanted one answer. Did it mean something? And Harcourt's like, what? He's like, the boat. He's like, look, I'm not asking for anything. I just want to know, did it mean something? So finally she answers. She says, of course it did. It meant everything. So yeah, she basically is professing her love for him at that point, just letting down the barriers and admitting the truth. And we see how happy he is. Look at him, man. He is just dancing away inside. That is so cool. So cool. All right, so always time for one more concert, right? This time they're going to see Foxy Shazam, the ones that sing the opening number, right? And so we see that it's 1 week later, and we get a good look at the lead singer who has a mustache that is a choice. It's a choice. But now we can confirm, because we've seen him, right, that is indeed him in the Superman movie as well. Isn't that crazy? I mean, look at the mustache, right? Is there any way we could have thought that was anybody else on the planet? But yeah, so basically he had a cameo in the Superman movie and then shows up to sing and have a cameo in the Peacemaker season 2. Very, very cool. And now finally, at long last, we get to see the two of them together. I'm assuming they're a couple. Let me know your thoughts on that, but I'm assuming they're together now. All right, so we also see it's time for a new start because sure enough, Adrian has decided, blood curse aside, we're going to use this money, and they start a new business. And I love the pencils up the nose thing from John Cena, but they're moving everything in, including Ultra Bunny. Gotta have an Ultra Bunny appearance, right? We've seen Ultra Bunny in The Suicide Squad because Rick Flag had him on his shirt. Frankenstein wore it on his shirt in Creature Commandos. And we've seen Ultra Bunny many, many times. I love him. Obstacles are opportunities. Perfect. All right, so then we see that Eagly finally has a second friend. He's warming up to Economos because remember, he always chirped angrily whenever Economos got near him. And actually, this is really important because with Chris, where he's going to end up in just a second, Eagly needs a second friend. All right, so we finally get a well-deserved slow walk. I love the Judo Masters with them, Flurry's with them, of course, Bordeaux. No surprise that she joined them. And Judo Master, as usual, over on the left there is frowning, but as they walk outside, I actually see a little smile on his face. Is that the first smile he's had in 2 seasons? Maybe I'm forgetting one, but I think that's the first time he smiled. All right, so then we see the name of their company they're forming, which is Checkmate, making the world better. All right, so in the comics, we first saw Checkmate appear in Action Comics 598. They were founded by Waller as an offshoot of Task Force X. And then later we saw a reboot of the Checkmate comic, and this time Sasha Bordeaux herself was part of Checkmate. So it'll be very interesting to see what role they're going to play going forward. I think they're going to be battling against Argus. So, Argus may have met its match because they've got a pretty good team. And that includes Eagly himself, who is quite happy about the new business. And remember, he's the prime eagle, so who knows what he may unleash against Argus. But unfortunately, all does not end well because they bag and tag Chris and drag him back to Argus and throw him into this new dimension they found, right? And they unchain him and leave him there. And he's like, what is up with this? Well, Rick Flag explains, before we move all the metahuman prisoners here, we thought a little due diligence is required. And I want to thank you for volunteering. He's like, I didn't volunteer. And they're like, oh, really? Because that is definitely Christopher Smith's signature right here. So yeah, it's actually legal that they threw him in here. Oh my word. And then he says, this is for Ricky. I'm so torn on this. Because on one hand, yeah, Peacemaker did kill his son. But on the other hand, man, Flag, you're being a jerk. You're being a total jerk. But yeah, he gets his final revenge there. So Chris tries to jump through the door, but it vanishes and closes, and he is left all alone. And then we hear lots of noises. It is not an abandoned planet after all. Lots of dangerous animal noises in the distance. And we're left wondering, where do we go from here? So there is no Peacemaker Season 3 greenlit at this point, and in fact, Gunn's kind of downplaying another season. There is another Creature Commandos season coming, and of course, Man of Tomorrow and Supergirl are coming. So what do you think? Where do you think this story is going to pick up, and how on earth is he going to get out of here? And tell me your thoughts about Salvation Planet as well as Checkmate. Love to know your thoughts on all of it, because you know I read and respond to everything. So don't forget about that October contest. Be a subscriber, leave a comment, win a book or a steelbook, and there's the membership option in case you're interested in that. Plus, I always love to mention the Discord. Here we are in the spoiler section for Peacemaker Season 2, and people are already ranking the DCU up to this point. So let me know your thoughts on that. How would you rank each entry of the DCU so far? Plus, I promised I would talk about the Doomsday Countdown Watch, every day listed here at 7 p.m. Eastern. We'll watch a different movie or show as we head towards the December 18, 2026 release of Doomsday. So we have 2,400 members across the globe, conversations 24/7, and I'll leave a pinned comment so you can join. Also, if you don't mind, like this video, subscribe if you haven't already. You can check out more content, and we'll all eagerly await the next exciting entry of the DCU.